Okay. Thank you again for all your patience, for having been here all this time. Thank you also to our live stream audience. We are going to begin our third panel of the day, third and final panel. And it's the future of information in Latin America, power struggles, and in a new media environment. And our moderator is going to be Steve Levitsky. Steve is a professor of government at Harvard University. His field of interests are comparative and Latin American politics, with a focus on political regimes and regime change, parties and party change, as well as weak and informal institutions. He is author of Transforming Labor-Based Parties in Latin America, Argentine Peronism in Comparative Perspective, and co-editor of Argentine Democracy, The Politics of Institutional Weakness, and Informal Institutions and Democracy. He is currently finishing a book with Lucan Wei on the emergence and evolution of competitive, but I think it's been already...
A little outdated, that
part. It's been already published. It was published at the end of last year, and I'm sure it's a bestseller. So I will leave you with Steve, who will take charge of the panel today. Thank you, Steve.
Okay, thanks. As Leonardo said, the title of this third session is The Future of Information in Latin America, Power Struggles in a New Media Environment. And our leadoff speaker is known to many of you, Rosental Alves, who had a long career as a journalist in Brazil, some 3 decades, was one of the main initiators of bringing Brazilian print newspapers online in the mid-1990s. He was the first holder of the Knight Chair in International Journalism at UT Austin in 2002. He is currently director of the Knight Center for Journalism in the Americas and professor at the University of Texas Austin School of Journalism. He's also known to many of you locally here as, I think he's the first Brazilian to be a Nieman Fellow here, yes. Class of 1988. But not, right, the first, but there have been several since, right?
Several.
But he was the first.
Much better than me.
He was the first. Let me stop there, and
okay.
The floor is yours.
I'm going to talk from there because
Yes.
I have to confess that I'm addicted. I have an addiction. I've been in the PowerPoint Addicted Anonymous trying to get out of my addiction of PowerPoint, but the students have already told me how boring my PowerPoints are. But I don't do it for them. I do it for me. It's actually,
if you want,
it's an addiction. But ananyway, so
and speaking of power struggles, I'm going to be authoritarian in the 15-minute.
Yes, I will. You say, and I stop.
Okay.
It has already passed my time of rebellion. So, but don't start the clock yet, because we are still having some struggles here. Kevin is going to solve. So I'm going to talk about the ecosystem. You mentioned that I was what is it there? Okay, so let me start. There were some provocations today here that were very interesting. The last one, Pablo is an expert in that, so saying that journalism is not important anymore. Of course, he doesn't think that. He was just putting the bombshell here. Journalism has never been as important as it is now, because precisely of this this cacophony that everybody is a media. Everybody communicates. Anyone can commit acts of journalism. Journalism is not a monopoly of journalists anymore, etc. So that's more or less what I'm going to talk about. But Pablo did another thing also in the same way of provoking, although he really doesn't believe that, I know, that social media is not important because, and he was exaggerating to make a point, social media was not important because, the majority of people in Latin America cannot have access to it. Social media is extremely important in Latin America now because more and more Latin Americans have access to it. I mean, we have not had access to newspapers. Like someone mentioned here before, circulation of newspapers has always been very small. However, newspaper has a political influence that is great, is huge. So in percentage, we are above the world average. We are not like the richest regions of the world. So the influence of digital media in Latin America is much bigger than what the cold and low numbers of the internet penetration may indicate. The outreach of digital media, when you include the extension of the traditional media online, is much higher than we have never had with print media, for example. I don't know any news organization that has less audience online than they have in the print media reach. I simply, and I go all over Latin America, and I can attest that. Millions of Latin Americans that don't have regular access to internet and don't show up in those stats have access to internet through this fabulous network of LAN houses, cyber cafes, and on their workplaces as well. In many Latin American countries, like we saw here, actually I am wrong. In all Latin American countries, there are more cell phones than people. So the real impact of the digital revolution in Latin America is going to be on the cell phones. Cell phones are not phones anymore. They are truly the real personal computer. Finally, we have a personal computer that we sleep with them. I mean, it's such an extension of the bed. And I go talk in countries in Latin America, and I ask, how many of you wake up from your cell phone? And everybody says, I wake up with a cell phone. So it's so connected that people even sleep with it. And of course, most of the cell phones are not internet enabled yet, but they will be, and they are more and more in that way. Historically, the media in Latin America has been concentrated in a few hands, has been had lots of troubles. Like we talked today, one of the best things of the panels this morning was saying, that it's not black and white. We are not defending a heroic media. We're defending a media that had lots of sins and comes from a history of lots of sins. But one of the things that they had was power and control over information. They had that. If they decided we were not know about something, it was very hard for us to know that thing exists. As in the rest of the world, the digital technologies are lowering the entry barrier, allowing the establishment of new media players that I think is going to be one of the main points of my presentation here. And people are being empowered. People are gaining more control and power on information, and social media is playing a great role in that. The media ecosystem in Latin America is changing profoundly, as it is changing profoundly around the world, as it's changing profoundly here in the United States. And I have the pleasure and the satisfaction to introduce you to the new ecosystem of media. But before, I'm going to show you the previous ecosystem of media. This is the previous ecosystem of media. It's an ecosystem. It's strong. It has, you can see how strong the characters are, but it is based on scarcity. There are few channels. There are just the big media there, powerful and strong, but there is there is there is life there. But here is the new media ecosystem that is emerging, clearly emerging in Latin America. And of course, I brought something from Brazil for you. It's the rainforest. That is the difference. If you understand the difference between this and the previous photo, you understand what is going on in terms of communication, media, and journalism. I always remember reading that one river in the Amazon, any river, pick one, has more species than all the rivers in North America combined. So I'm talking about a new ecosystem created by digital technologies and the new revolution, which is connectivityness, permanent and ubiquitous, that creates life very easy. Everybody's a media. We move from a media-centric system to a individual-centric, to I-centric system, where there is a symbiotic relation between all of this, but where you can like a friend of mine was saying, without knowing my metaphor here, saying, entrepreneurism in journalism now is like putting a bacteria somewhere, and if the bacteria works, we create something. If not, we just have another one because it's kind of cheap to experiment. So this new media ecosystem has already had a strong impact on the traditional media, which is suffering the effects of that. It has empowered the audience vis-a-vis the media, as the media could never think about that they could fire back against them from the people, and allow the creation of what I want to stress this afternoon, which is a new breed of independent, non-profit or low-profit digital media organizations that are trying a sort of a new kind of journalism, very young, and yes, and practicing a new, a journalism that the media, traditional media, has kind of abandoned or lacked the opportunity. The traditional media is also struggling to adapt to this new ecosystem with mixed results, but they are extending their reach. They are experimenting also, not as much as they should. As many companies in other parts of the world, they are having problems to understand that in that ecosystem, in the previous ecosystem, a vertical communication, that is one-way communication, is acceptable. But in this new ecosystem where you have the symbiotic relationship between small organisms and big beasts, it is not possible to keep doing journalism. It's not news as usual. It's not business as usual. It's a completely different environment. So those who have been the very passive, voiceless audiences are becoming actually now active, voiceful networks of people. It's a logic that information is distributed between hubs and nodes, and everybody has a say. The case, one case of a great Mexican journalist, Carmen Aristegui, when she was fired last year, there was a social media rebellion against the media company that fired her because of government pressure or whatever. It was so much so that Twitter, Facebook, everything was inundated by the outrage of people. And this powerful media company did what? Called her back. Can you imagine that in other? This is just one example of several examples that this new system, this new ecosystem is influencing the media. The use of social media and even old-fashioned internet forums is substituting for the muzzled media that has been shut up or shut off by the drug cartels in Mexico. I'm sure that Marcela Turati is going to talk a bit about that, but it's heartbreaking. It's a bloodbath of journalists, and when you say, you know, don't practice self-censorship, etc., and you say, you know, if you don't practice, they kill you, and they really kill you. You have to respect the decision of people who are not publishing. But they are not publishing, but it's amazing if you go to hashtag Nuevo Laredo or many other hashtags that are the people themselves is talking about it. But as I'm saying here, the 4 dead bodies recently left in the streets of Nuevo Laredo, which, by the way, is just 4 hours by car from where I live in Austin, Texas, left the bodies, the remains of these poor people, one beheaded, with messages specifically saying, stop talking on the internet. It's almost like the bad guys are moving to the next step and saying, you know, we shut down journalists, now we're going to shut down everybody. So it is another illustration of the force of this. In Mexico City, in the last year, I would say, Marcela, there was a sort of a wave of new websites, political websites, Animal Político, Sin Embargo, Eje Central. There is a new one that has just been launched 24 hours or something like that. It's a wave of Huffington Post's a la Mexicana. It's a very interesting kind of new animal. We are about to hear about from 2 of the most innovative and high-quality journalism sites of this new crop, of this new breed that I see a lot of potential on it. One is El Puercoespín from Argentina that Gabriela is going to talk about, and La Silla Vacia from Colombia that Juanita, via the miracle of Skype, will talk about. But there are many new voices in this new generation of journalistic projects in Latin America that you could hardly imagine before, when the entry barriers were huge. I'm not saying that they are displacing the others, I mean the traditional media, but they are being recognized as players, and they are having influence in those countries. One is not even new; is pretty old. But it became, I mean, it was created 11 years ago, is El Faro in El Salvador. It claims to be the first real internet newspaper in Latin America. It started in the house of the founder without any money, and for years it was like that. But I put it into this new breed because I think in the last few years it really was blossoming with investigations and things that the press was not covering in Latin America, and getting international prizes and help, etc. This is the opposite. This is very new. It's from this year, from early this year, from Guatemala. It is created by a small group of journalists in one university. So it has some money from foundation, from Open Society Foundation, small money, but the big money is coming from the Jesuit university that is giving them an opportunity to practice a new kind of journalism in a country that like Claudia said here, it has been very difficult to report, and I think this is an example that you should pay attention to, because I think it will prosper. In Nicaragua, I mean, I was happy, obviously, that Carlos Eduardo mentioned mentioned the Night Center, and we have been working with some of those new media. But Carlos Fernando Chamorro, the founder of this, we had a forum 2 years ago in Austin that was about the impact of digital technology on democracy and journalism in Latin America. And when he came, he was still a television and print guy. And I think in the last 2 years he understood what was the importance for him, even in a poor country like Nicaragua, with a small penetration of internet, how you can make a difference. And just a couple of weeks ago, there was another site in Nicaragua in English called Nicaragua Dispatch that has just been created by a former foreign correspondent. Ricardo is right. I mean, there are less American foreign correspondents out there, but there are this kind of new breed of correspondent creating their own thing, like Inside Crime, for instance, which is another site that is created by former foreign correspondent there. The other one from Colombia that I think it's very innovative and very important is Verdad Abierta, that Maria Teresa Ronderos and Cesar and others created, which is a site that covers specifically the parapolitics and the abuses of the paramilitaries, and you know, it has been a great success because it is doing what the press is not doing, but it has been supported by Semana magazine, and it has been a sort of a new kind of journalism that want to keep these crimes for the records. This IDL Reportero is another very interesting case. It's a former Nieman fellow, Gustavo Gorriti, who has who has found no space in the traditional media to do investigative journalism, and created a non-profit entity connected with an NGO that has had a tremendous impact in Peru. It has done the kinds of investigation that he was used to do in La Prensa in Panama or in La República where he was, or in Caretas. But now this is kind of goes in the line of the phenomenon of nonprofit journalism that is growing here in the United States a lot. The problem of a site like that is sustainability. What is the business plan behind it? How it's going to survive? And it's the same that Americans are trying to come up with a solution as well here in the United States. The other one that I'm very proud of, and I'm in their board recently, they invited me, is CIPER from Chile. CIPER is Centro de Periodismo Investigativo, or de Investigación, and it is now a foundation. It was created by Monica Gonzalez, a local journalist, and John Dings, who he teaches at the university at Colombia. And now John is left. He has other projects, and Monica created a foundation trying to defy the idea that in Latin America we cannot have philanthropy behind journalism, right? So it's a foundation. The main benefactor, ironically, is the owner of the second largest media company in the country, is the owner of Copesa, who has La Tercera, and it's the rival of El Mercurio. But anyway, he decided to be a benefactor of a sort of a new kind of a project, and they have, like I said, won several prizes and have been doing a journalism that is complementary to what the media does. there. The other one is in Brazil now. This is a brand new one too. It has it's just a few months old, and it works like an investigative journalism agency that has, for instance, it has been selected by WikiLeaks to be the partner to go through the cables of WikiLeaks, and it has just been awarded. I learned that just half an hour ago with a Ford Foundation grant, which is great, but also is struggling with the status of non-profit journalism that I would love to discuss in the questions. And finally, the last example is another small thing from Brazil. It's a site that covers specifically the Brazilian Congress, and it has been victimized in the last few days by what in Brazil we called judicial censorship or judicial terrorism against the media, which was they disclosed the illegal salaries that were paid to public functionaries who work for the Congress of Brazil. That is totally illegal, and the officers are now doing a series of suits against them. So the last time I checked, it was 44 suits against them, and even if they win each suit, it's a lot of trouble and a lot of money to do that. And this is a totally online site, specializes a kind of a political site without the print part that Politico has. So I'm very optimistic. I think it has never been a better time to be a journalist, because the new generation is reinventing journalism in a way that my generation could not even dream to do. So I'm contrary to June. I'm very optimistic. I believe that we are in bad trouble now, but we are much better in Latin America. We are better off. We have always been. I grew up in a dictatorship, in a military dictatorship. Like I said this morning, I used to receive the phone call from the political police to order me to put a paper in a typewriter and get their order of censorship of things. We don't have this anymore. We have other kinds of problems, but I think the future is bright. Let's go there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Alves.
Thank you.
It's really exciting. I have to say, I don't do journalism, and I get to this very late, but I learned very quickly in living in Peru this last year during the election, that buying 6 morning newspapers at the kiosco just was not enough anymore. And it took me about a day and a half to realize to really learn the value of some of these sites. Our next speaker is Graciela. Oh, I want to say one thing I forgot to say before, which is that we are live streaming, and that our tweeting hashtag is LATAM Press. I was told to remind you all of that. That said, our next speaker is Graciela Mochkofsky, who is an Argentine journalist and nonfiction writer based in Buenos Aires, also a former Nieman Fellow, 2009. She has worked as a political correspondent for a variety of Buenos Aires newspapers, and she's also, as Rosental mentioned, editor of an important online media site, El Puercoespín. And in addition, she's written no fewer than 5 books, including a terrific biography of Argentine journalist Jacobo Timerman, and that's entitled Timerman, el periodista que quiso ser parte del poder. The floor is yours, 10 minutes.
Okay. I'm going to read, because I'm insecure, so I apologize. For the past 3 years, the relationship between press and politics has been the most important topic of public debate in Argentina. If you read, watched, or listened to the media and to the public discourse of social and political leaders, pundits, etc., you found only 2 versions of reality or two versions of this conflict. In one, Grupo Clarín, which is the largest media holding of Argentina, was a monopolistic power, applied monopolistic practices, and blackmailed government and politicians to secure special benefits, economic benefits. In this version, Clarín even wanted to decide who was going to be the next president of Argentina. And Clarín was, in this version, the true power and sometimes even a threat to democracy. In the other version, this version, of course, was said by the government and people or sectors or media who supported the government. The other version, the version of Clarín and other mainstream media, said that the Kirchner's government was an authoritarian regime akin to the Chavez regime in Venezuela or to the Peronista government of the 1950s in Argentina, which seek to eliminate freedom of the press and gain total political control, suppressing freedom of expression and democracy. Both versions were untrue, or if you want, not completely truthful. Some of this was half true, some was a lie at some point. A truthful and accurate account was urgent. I thought everybody's talking about this. Every piece of information we are getting is about this conflict, and we are not getting the story right. So I decided to write a book about it. I was invited to this panel, and I thank the people who invited me to tell you about this book and about the situation in Argentina. But I will tell you a little bit about the book, because what I want to tell you is what is the real situation and what the real conflict was and what's the situation of the press and its relationship to power in Argentina. So I also want to say that I had to write a book because I found it was not possible to tell the whole story, in the existing media in Argentina. So I did. I took a year and a half to do this book. The book came out a few months ago. In this book, I told the story in its. I tried to tell the story in its complexity and the whole story. And it's the story is it's about the relationship between traditional media and political power in my country during the past 3 decades, from our last military dictatorship that ended in 1983, throughout the democratic period until today, and the government of Cristina Kirchner. It has been a very complex relationship of shared complicity and negotiations under the table. The politicians in my country, especially the Kirchners, believe that the media are political actors and that they play the political game, and they are not a watchdog power or the voice of civil society as they say they are. The Kirchners, this is the politicians' point of view, and the Kirchners were not the first to publicly accuse Clarín of being a political player. Raúl Alfonsín, our first democratic president in '83, did it in the '80s. Carlos Menem did it in the '90s. And throughout our democratic period, Clarín has, and this is me saying, throughout our democratic period, Clarín has lived, I would say, a parasitic relationship or a very, strong relationship with political power. Either Clarín gets what it wants or it attacks the governments. The newspaper in particular, because Clarín is holding, as I said, its TV stations, cable TV, a newspaper, which is the center of the holding, and then many other companies, not only communication companies, they also have other interests, business interests. But basically the newspaper, in particular, always goes from supporting the government in the beginning to becoming a hard and total critic at some point after half of the government, and towards the end of that presidential mandate. This process is always accompanied by business negotiations under the table, as I said before. That was the case during the first Kirchner administration. Clarín was a strong supporter of the government. Kirchner and Clarín's CEO, Héctor Mañeto, met on a regular basis. They discussed both the coverage of the Clarín media and the business interest of the Clarín group. For instance, they had 2 big negotiations during the 4 years of Néstor Kirchner's government from 2003 to 2007. One was the possibility of acquiring the shares of Telecom, the international telephone company that Clarín was very interested in, and the government had become a key regulator. I mean, they decided whether this part of the company was going to be sold or not. And they were negotiating that, and they both agreed that Clarín had to have shares in that company. And the other one was the merge of the two most important cable companies in Argentina, Multicanal and Cablevisión, that Clarín had acquired. And 3 days before leaving power, President Kirchner signed the merge, the government approval for the merge. Then at the beginning of the second Kirchner administration, I don't know if you all are familiar with Argentinian politics, but the first government is different presidents, but it's the same political process because they are partners. They were partners. Nestor Kirchner was president for 4 years, and then his wife, Cristina Kirchner, became his successor, and then he was going to be president next, but he died. Well, before that, and then she was just re-elected a few weeks ago. So at the beginning of the second Kirchner administration, or led by Cristina Kirchner, a fierce national conflict started or began after the government tried to impose new taxes on grain exports, and the government ended up losing a lot of public support. And then at that point, Clarín stopped supporting the Kirchners. The relations between the media's CEO and the former president turned bitter. They had Clarín turned into the opposition, and a high-profile war between the two began. The government took measures to reduce the size and the influence of Clarín. The passing of a new media law, for instance, an agreement with the National Soccer Association to cancel its agreement of exclusivity with Clarín for the broadcasting of soccer matches, the cancellation of public licenses for Clarin's internet company, a project to declare the production of print paper a matter of national interest. Clarín owns, with the newspaper La Nación, the other traditional big newspaper in Argentina, Papel Prensa, the only print paper plant of Argentina. So they have the monopoly of the print paper production. And the government even sued Clarín for their alleged complicity with human rights violation during our last military dictatorship. Papel Prensa was acquired during the military dictatorship in 1976, and the government is a partner of these newspapers in the ownership of in Papel Prensa, and the previous owners of Papel Prensa were kidnapped and tortured. A couple of them died as they were being tortured, and they claim now that they were persecuted in part because that the newspapers, that especially Clarín, were accomplices in their persecution because they wanted to control the paper plant that they owned. Some measures, such as the new media law, were had been discussed in Argentina for a long time. Were improvements, I would say. They were long overdue. But they were, as other things, like a good thing, passed or approved, or for the wrong reasons, because the main objective of the government at passing this law was to destroy Clarín, or to make Clarín weaker. But the law is now existing. There is no censorship, formal censorship in Argentina. There were no shutting down of media outlets. But the government, the government launched and financed a net of friendly media outlets in which there is no margin for dissent or criticism to the government. Clarín and other mainstream media launched a campaign against the government in which they twisted reality, they manipulated the facts. Factual and investigative journalism were abandoned in a great extent. I would say that especially Clarín paid a high price for this because it lost credibility and readers. This is a very, very quick summary of the story. But the main point of my book is to say that this is not a new problem. the conflict between the government and the media, and especially this holding, the largest media company in Argentina. This is an old problem that has worsened due to the I would say a decadence of the mainstream media and and a result, of course, of the political struggles in my country. I think the news, the good news, and I think it's very good news, is that now for the first time we have the possibility, as Rosental was saying very clearly, the possibility of creating alternative media outlets in Argentina, as in all the other countries. There is a multiplicity of information sources for the audience and for the public, and public participation. Civic participation is more extensive than ever before. Argentina, I don't know, I'm very bad with figures, but maybe you remember them, Rosental, but Argentina has the largest social network participation in the continent and one of the largest in the world. Everybody, of course, a large extent of the population, people who are not below poverty line, I would say, and that's more than half of the country are, I think that's actually about 60% of the country are, many of them, most of them, in a huge amount, are connected to social networks or participate in the forums even in the forums of the traditional media online. If you see the number of comments under any story at La Nación newspaper, Clarín does not allow comments in most of their articles, but La Nación does, and it's over 1,000 comments every time, sometimes 3,000 comments, and it's quite impressive. So, and if you read, I'm addicted to the comments, and many comments are to correct the journalist, to say this information is not true, you're twisting the facts, or people who
with his family and moved to the United States. Another was the sad confession of the director of a border newspaper who lived in a region ruled by the narcos, the drug traffickers, who once a time published a photograph of the Mexican president in the top of their journal as a way to challenge the criminal dictatorship. So, not every place is extreme, not everyone is silenced. Mexico City, for example, still remains as a bubble, far from the violence, but there is a tendency toward silence, a forced censorship, a tendency to act as nothing's happening. Some journalists make heroic efforts to inform, to keep investigating. In some places, rival news organizations got together to write security protocols, forcing themselves to go out to report together, forgetting about scoops and exclusives. Some papers don't use bylines for drug stories to protect the author. Journalists and writers has created interesting websites as 72 Migrantes, or Nuestra Aparente Rendición, or Menos Días Aquí, where they are trying to keep indignation alive before these horrors. This is the overview in the Mexican press. It is not reassuring, but I can tell you that we are looking for ways to protect the information from censorship, either by politicians or drug lords, and to protect ourselves, so that we don't lose our lives or let fear take away our capacity to enjoy life. I've known many local journalists that cannot publish what they know, but they gather information to make it public later, in a future that is not life-risking. Others pass along information to national and international media. I know a small network formed by local and national media editors that support themselves in case of an emergency and agree to denounce critical situations. In places like Juarez and Morelos, and other regions of the country, there are new journalist networks that are organizing training workshops for everybody, as well as monitoring themselves when they are reporting from dangerous zones, looking that nobody stays behind. I know from some publishers in the border of Mexico and United States that in rebellion against the impotence have launched websites from the American side of the border to tell what they can't not print or tell. Some reporters have moved to live to the United States and report from there. In some newsrooms, reporters, editors, and photographers are inventing their own security protocols. But generally speaking, with some exceptions, media owners are not interested in safety of their reporters. They have not taken this issue seriously. Some reporters like me organized in a network we call Journalists on Foot, la red de periodistas de a pie, where we request training from experts in areas where we need it, because we feel unprepared. For example, how to interview children affected by violence, or how to approach the victims, how to protect us and organize against the country becoming a zone of silence, how to handle our fear, what are the stories of the cartels and their ways of they operate. As La Red, this red, is formed by active reporters, we immediately have the pulse of what's going on the ground and think quickly what to do and explore a new approach to the problems. Sometimes we organize casual talk in bars with journalists, or organizing forums or workshops on many issues, or we organize demonstrations asking for justice for our colleagues, or just send press brief with testimonies from colleagues on risk. We have becoming the bridge between the big freedom expressions organization and active reporters, because we are journalists, active journalists, and the colleagues trust us. And some of them write us asking for tips to launch their own networks. Or last week, for example, a group asked us for psychological health, and we gave them a list of psychologists who voluntarily offer to attend reporters in different cities. We are giving workshops. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. We are giving workshops on reporting the violence victims, to give the grisly statistics a face, so we learn how to bear so much pain, and looking for a constructive focus in which we could make the victims visible and inform about those citizens who are organizing themselves, who have lost their fear, and who resist the situation with dignity. We wanted to demonstrate that there are still space for hope in moments in which it seems there is not possibility of hope. It is clear for us that the internet and the social networks are an ally to fight against the silence that is expanding. Last year, we used social media to call for a successful demonstration in Mexico City and other cities, the first of its kind, to demand investigations on crimes of our colleagues. Last December, we organized a rising funds collecta during Christmas, trying to make visible the existence of exiled journalists and their situation. We are about to try a new modality with the Night Center, with Rosental, to offer an online talk to get in touch with reporters that we know are facing an emergency now and do not attend physically the workshops because they are frightened that someone might spy on them. So the challenge is wider, especially this year when bloggers and people who use Twitter and Facebook have been executed by the drug cartels, or apparently by the drug cartels. And we are thinking more secure ways to communicate what is happening and to how to organize ourselves. So the fights are big, but we are trying to do the best we can. Thank you.
I have a question. Is Juanita here?
Juanita, can you come?
Ah, okay. Do I still have to introduce her? Yes? Hi, Juanita.
Hi.
Juanita,
Yes.
Now, wait a
Juanita-
second, I have to.
Can you hear?
I still have to introduce you.
La van a poner atrás.
Can you hear?
Yes?
I can introduce people I can't see.
La
Okay.
Silla.
Okay? Can we start?
Okay.
All right, Juanita León, another former Nieman Fellow, class of 2007, I believe. Has been a reporter for Semana, El Tiempo, Wall Street Journal, Americas, all in Colombia. She is founder and editor of La Silla, Vacia, which was mentioned as one of the innovative websites by Rosental. It's a website about Colombian politics that focuses, among other things, on parapolitics, which is something that has been insufficiently covered by the traditional media. Juanita, the floor is yours.
Okay. Hi, how are you? I'm so sorry that I cannot be there, but I'll try to do my best. Stephanie has asked me to talk about how new media like La Silla Vacía enables freedom of the press. And I have 3 points to make in that sense. I think the answer is yes, it enables more freedom of the press because it can allow to have more information coming into the public discourse. I set up La Silla Vacía to talk about the powerful in Colombia and how power is exercised in Colombia. After being a Nieman Fellow and taking a wonderful class on the history of Colombia with John Womack, I realized that we know very little about how power is really exercised in Colombia, and that part of being powerful is that you decide what is said about yourself and in what terms. Because, of course, well, that's in part what power is about, that you decide the portrayal of yourself. So I thought that it would be interesting to create a new media that really focused on the powerful and how power is exercised, and that has been the focus of La Silla Vacía since I created it. And I think in that sense, it opens up a little bit the information that is circulated in Colombia, because in Colombia it's a country with a high concentration of media, and there is a cozy relationship among owners of the big media and politics. Even though, of course, there are really courageous journalists in Colombia, even in the, especially in the traditional media, they have done some amazing reports and uncovered a lot of scandals. But in general, the really powerful are protected. So I think that since we launched La Silla Vacía 2.5 years ago, I think that we have brought more information on how power is exercised, and that has been good for press freedom. I think also we have, at least in a little way, we have broken the consensus that is fabricated among the media. I think that sometimes what happens is that owners of the media and the big journalists get together and talk and discuss as friends, what's going on, and a consensus is agreed upon, like one interpretation of reality. So, of course, someone like Graciela knows a lot more about it, but what I think is that consensus is broken not only by media like La Silla Vacía, but like with Twitter, Facebook, but especially Twitter in Colombia. Things that before would have gone unsaid or silenced cannot be silenced anymore. There was a recent episode where the ex-vice president, that is now the director of one of the biggest radio news channels, he said that the protesters, there is a huge protest in Colombia for an education reform, like in Chile. And so the vice president said, you know what, these students should be controlled using tasers, those electric shocks. So he said that, and that would have been something that probably would have never really made the news because journalists tend to protect each other a lot. But people in Twitter started circulating the video and criticizing him, and it became such a big deal that it was impossible to ignore by the rest of the media. And I think that's something that, I think that putting the media on the spot is also a way of making freedom of the press, guaranteeing freedom of the press, because I think the media is also like a big power that is not really accountable most of the times. And I think that this new emergent media can make traditional media more accountable. The third thing where I think that La Silla Vacia has made a little difference is in the way we cover the private sector and the relationships between the private sector and the public sector. Maybe because big companies end up financing most of the advertising of traditional media, and not only advertising, but banks, big consulting firms, big companies are very important for the other businesses of media that most conglomerate owners of media in Colombia, like they have a newspaper, but they also have other businesses that are even more important. So usually businesses in Colombia are covered in a very positive light. Whenever we talk a big businessman, is to say that he's great, wonderful, he does philanthropic things, and they're all wonderful. And I think that that has obscured the sometimes tight relationship that exists between public and private sector in terms of corruption. So La Silla was to open up a small space there, talking about the implications of big mining projects, the relationships as in contracts between private and public sector. And I think introducing that other area of coverage has also been good for democracy in general. So how do we do it? I think that not only because La Silla Vacia is not owned by a big family, powerful family, or a conglomerate or an economic conglomerate, we can say some things that other media cannot do it. But I also think that new media changes the whole approach to what a journalistic story ends up being. So I gave Stephanie like a small presentation that maybe Stephanie you can pass while I talk. Is that possible?
Yes, absolutely. It's up.
Okay, good. So I'm going to see it also. Okay, so you can go to the first one. This is how La Silla Vacia used to look like 3 months ago. Now we have made some changes. But I'm going to try to make emphasis in some aspects of the way we approach journalism that I think make a difference in terms of freedom of the press. The first one, if you go to the next slide. The first thing that we do is that to the next, we try to do less interpretation and go more to the raw information. So we have a section that is called La Movida, where opinion leaders answer the hot question of the week directly without the mediation of the journalist. You can go to the next one and to the next one. So I think that's important because sometimes the role of mediators of journalists doesn't let many voices come to the public discourse. No, we end up only interviewing people from the extreme right or from the extreme left, but a lot of the people in the center end up not having really space to talk. So I think internet really, these new media allow for a lot more voices to come into the public discourse, and that's very important. We have also created like a new narrative that we have called transparent journalism. So Stephanie, I'm not sure if you are there. Are you there?
Yes.
Transparent journalism?
No,
next.
Go ahead.
Okay, so for example, I did a big investigation on the extrajudicial killings in Colombia, and we decided to publish the information as we, like a normal story, and also the raw information that we used, all the FOIAs, all the interviews that I did, like marking out what was off the record, but you can see here in yellow the interviews that I had with the general of the army, and I think that allows, that puts the tools of the information in the hands also of human rights activists, and I think that's part of the role of the new role of journalists. It's not only to give people the processed information, but also the raw information that they can use in other ways that maybe we don't even suspect. At La Silla Vacia, we also do a lot of things in real time. We have covered a lot of audiences. You can go to that page.
Yes.
A lot of audiences using Twitter, and that has become quite popular. And I think that has been important because before, a lot of judicial procedures, discussions in Congress, no one was covering them all the time. So now someone from La Silla is there tweeting all the time what is going on, and I think that's important to have that record, because a lot of time, like congressmen and the judges know that that someone is reporting everything that they're saying, and that it's interesting for them to feel that kind of supervision. Well, La Silla Vacia is quite interactive, and we do a lot of interviews where the users are the ones that interview directly the politicians in real time. So I think that's also a possibility for citizens to ask the questions that they have and not the ones that journalists think that are important. The next one, I think that this one is very important about recovering memory of the country. We have done like a virtual museum of politics where we remember things that have happened in the country as if they were part of a museum. So I think that the fact that this new media really can keep a record that is brought up to the present all the time, I think also makes powerful people more accountable, because sometimes they just change their mind or they say that they haven't said something, but you have the proof because you have memory.
Juanita, you have about 1 more minute. I'm sorry.
Sure.
2. Okay.
1.
We have a fight here over how many more minutes you have. So.
You have a what?
I said we have a fight here over how many more minutes you should have, but if it could come to a close soon, thank you.
Okay, so just forget the presentation and I'll finish. So the last question that was asked was if there is a future for this kind of new media, and I definitely think that this is the future or at least one of the futures for journalism in Latin America. I think it's very good news that a lot of the best journalists in Latin America are really thinking how to create their own media, and they are giving the step forward to do it. I think it's the fact that the Open Society Foundation has the will to finance this kind of ventures, at least at the beginning. I think it's important, but I think it's also good news to see that every month we have more advertising that we used to have. So I think that there is a growing interest in this kind of media, and also a lot of the audience is coming to this kind of media. And I think the fact that media like El Faro, Animal Político, Puercoespín, La Silla Vacia are surviving, that means that there is hope, and that really that's a field that will develop slowly, but in a fun way. So I do think that there is a future for this kind of media. I hope, because that's my job. So I guess this is it, Stephanie. I can answer questions if there's any.
Okay, we've got about 45 seconds for discussion. No, that's not true. I think we have about 50. Excuse me, I'm gonna get okay. Okay. Let me launch the first question. The part of the success in terms of really hard-hitting independent journalism of these new media sites has been that up to date, new media has remained small. As all of you have suggested, this is coming. This is growing. It's not going to be long. Argentina's right at the cusp of this being very big. Peru's a little further away, other countries, but this is coming soon. What happens when it's big? I understand that new media, that it's difficult, if not impossible, to establish monopolies like Clarín with new media. But once governments realize that new media is big, and it's not there yet, but it's soon, what prevents politicization of the kind that we see with old-style media in Peru or Argentina today from eventually occurring in new media as well? Is there anything inherent to new media that prevents pretty serious politicization?
You are the expert. I guess you should answer. Then I can.
Well, I can start. I can start. I certainly can. The thing is this. My preach is that we should not think about the future based on the past. We should not think about the media formats and the way the media is in society. It is not a new medium that is coming. It's a new logic of communication that is different. It's like the article of Clay Shirky that answers that says the unthinkable about the newspaper, the debacle of the business model that allowed this kind of media that has this kind of problems that Graciela mentioned here. So I think there will be a formula of doing that, but it's much more horizontal now than it was before. So it is more like we are moving from atoms to bits. We are moving from solid information to liquid information that goes everywhere, and it's unstoppable. And the powerful people are trying to control and prevent. So the basis of your question is correct, saying basically what I understood is that they will find a way to replicate the same kind of controls. And my answer is that it's going to be more difficult, but that is the friction that will happen.
Yeah, I don't see that. Well, there is no such. I mean, there is Latin America, but every country is different. So I will just talk for Argentina. I don't see the situation in which a government can control the internet. I don't know, like a China kind of.
No, not control.
Because this is society. Because that's not the kind of control that a government has on society.
But
right?
once a website gets big,
Yeah.
Power and resources from the government are meaningful. Influence people. You can buy off.
What happened, let me tell you what happened in Argentina. The government uses social media a lot and very effectively, and they have a network of bloggers and Twitterers and commentators that are very active at attacking Clarín, for instance, or at answering anything that's said against the government everywhere. So if you write anything at, I don't know, I have a blog at El País in Spain, and they will go there and just, write 50 comments saying that I'm a bastard and I'm a liar, but then another 50 people will respond to them and with arguments. So I think that adds to the debate, but they cannot control the debate. And the example of the comments on the page on the online newspapers, I think it's very symptomatic that Clarín is, I think, the only, not the only actually, but they have the largest website. They have millions. I think it's 4 million people a day. Sorry, just visiting the page, and they don't allow comments because I think they are. And I know the tensions between the website and the print page, and they are afraid of the website because they think they have to have control on what's published. And that's an old mentality, right? Because they think they are printing paper, but they are online. So people go and answer to those or criticize those stories at La Nación newspaper, for instance, because that they have the forums, and so they go there and talk about what Clarín has published, clarin.com. So I think, as Rosental was saying, that it's become so horizontal that there's no way. I mean, it escapes the control of the governments or of the politicians, and there's also an economic, which is, I think, another good side of this new media revolution. And print media in Argentina has depended a lot, and it's part of the war with the government right now on state ads, on government ads. Small newspapers rely a lot in the provinces almost completely. So that's the way the governments and provincial governments have controlled the media, the print media. And the media, not just the print media, but especially the print media. And you don't need state ads if you are, you can use them. But you can, the business structure, there is no business model that's clear yet, but they won't be able to control a media outlet, an internet media outlet through state ads, because it works in a different way.
Go ahead, sure.
As Rosental mentioned, in Mexico there is a boom of these electronic medias, but many people think that the majority are electoral projects because the next year we elect a new president. So we think that many of them are financed by political subjects, and we don't know if this boom it will last or will be sustained until the next year, and we have to wait. And another thing is the social media are really important in this moment in Mexico for the violence, and in some place is the only way for communication among the citizens. And they inform by Twitter and Facebook where is the danger, what is happening, how many people was killed yesterday. So that is another important reason to this boom too.
Excellent. I'll take questions from the public. Yes.
Again, but very briefly, there is one way in which this new media could be controlled, and it has to do with the internet service providers, and it's even a problem here in the United States. There is this question of what is called net neutrality, that they are supposed to provide the same kind of service to everybody, regardless of how much they pay, but there is some proposals in place that especially some big service providers would like to be able to provide faster, better service to people who pay more. So this is just like, this is the one way which could control this new media.
Yeah, let me tell you this one interesting thing in Nicaragua this week or last week. They have the students' demonstrations there. And the students were saying to each other, let's stop using Twitter and Facebook to articulate. Let's use just texting, because the Ortega administration was kind of monitoring in the way that Graciela was explaining and confounding everybody. So when I say that this liquid thing is that even with the efforts of corporations of dump net neutrality, etc., the format of the internet is much more difficult than censor or than stop than it was before. It's just a complexity. But like the Chinese has proven that they can, especially sometimes with American corporations' support, they can control effectively.
Unfortunately, our moderator has had to leave, but I'm going to take his place. So we'll keep on for. We had anticipated this to end at 4:15, but we can carry on until 4:30.
Yeah, 4 hours. 4 more hours are okay. Yeah.
So we have two questions here. One here, Boris, and there, Atul.
Yeah, I have a question for the whole panel. Excellent presentations, by the way. And I want to know what is your opinion about the possibility of this type of political sites to flourish in more polarized societies. Colombia is living a process of depolarization in a way. Mm-hmm. But countries like Colombia, like Venezuela, Ecuador, or Nicaragua are in the middle of polarization and have hybrid regimes. So do you think that it's possible to see this type of political sites as La Silla Vacia or other examples that you have mentioned in more polarized societies with hybrid regimes?
First, you, and then Juanita, I think, also would like to answer this question. So, Graciela,
okay.
You start and then we have
well, we had, Argentina is not as polarized now as it was before. I think the recent election results show that. I think people are tired of this political and media polarization, but it's still very polarized in the media. You're either for the government or against the government. That does not allow a lot of high quality journalism. I think I agree with a lot of what you said before in the first panel that factual journalism and investigative journalism is in a very bad shape. We have a very good tradition of journalism in our past, and now I think it's one of the worst moments of Argentina journalism. I think you have to read 5 newspapers and you end up not knowing what happened because the facts are opposite and different. I mean, how many people die? You have 5 in the newspaper, 10 in another newspaper, and it was the same. It was the same crash. So it's not just the political polarization, but the standards of good journalism behind that war of the government against the media has really suffered. So, and we don't have anything like La Silla Vacia in Argentina, and I think it's very necessary. I think there's a big need for that, and I think even the readers of, especially the readers and the audiences of mainstream media are really thirsty for that, and they will go and they will run and they will go to one outlet like that. I think the main problem is funding. I think you can get, it's a very good economic moment in Argentina now. There's a lot of money. We've been offered money to create a political media like that, and we have refused because all of them have strings attached. And if you do that, you cannot be independent. So we've decided to be poor and independent. But that doesn't solve the problem so someone has to, at some point we will have to find a way to solve that business problem and do it. We tried with the Soros Foundation, but Argentina doesn't seem to be, it doesn't look like we have problems with the press, really. We're not Mexico, of course, and we don't have, there's no, for the outside world, there's no idea that the freedom of expression or the press is in danger in Argentina, and it's not. We have, I think, 12 newspapers, print newspapers just in Buenos Aires city, and there are 3 economic newspapers. It looks like it's thriving if you see the numbers, but the quality is really low. So I don't know, that's the answer from an Argentinian point of view.
Juanita?
Yeah, I think that there is a risk of, in general, in internet, I think people try to look for information that confirms the previous positions that they have. And I think that in internet it's easier to do like journalism of affirmation in terms that you know that you're a liberal site and liberals come to your site to read your information and they don't have to read information that doesn't fit with their own prejudices. But at the same time, I think that the fact that media like La Silla Vacia exists allows to have other kind of information that is not so loaded with a political agenda or with an economic agenda behind, because the owners don't have to make such a huge investment, so they don't have so much at stake. You know, in a country like Venezuela, maybe you have like on the one side the Chavistas and the other side the anti-Chavistas. But maybe if you have other media that is more interested in just doing journalism, you can use that information to depolarize, because you are giving information instead of just biased opinions. So I think it goes both ways. You know, if of course one of the sides is using the media for that, of course it will be more polarized. But if you have other sites more run by journalists, I think that it will help to depolarize.
Well, one thing, responding to your question, Boris, I think first of all, there is no polarization in Venezuela or in Ecuador or there is a war. It's a communication war where journalism is the first victim.
That's what I said in the morning.
Yeah, exactly. It's really more than a polarization, because a polarization is just two poles opposing that are kind of talking. I mean, and when I say, and I heard this morning here several times, I mean, is the journalists who ended up being victims, etc., because they cannot do their work because their companies are engaged in a belligerent situation. So responding directly to your question, I think yes, it is theoretically possible to develop this, like Graciela said, and Juanita said too. I mean, proposing a serene, tranquil voice of professional journalism with a space to see both sides and do the basics of like our godfather Bill Kovac would say, the elements of journalism. Is a business plan for the wars that are going on in those so-called polarized countries.
Okay, we have two questions. We have Atul.
Juanita's phone call is down.
Pardon?
Juanita is.
Oh, Juanita Skype is down.
No.
Oh,
she's there. She's
No,
there.
she's there.
She's there.
We have Atul, then we have Yael, and then we have Ricardo. And what we'll do is, we'll have the three questions, and then we'll have a round of responses because we're running out of time. Please, Atul.
Atul Singh, I'm the founder and editor-in-chief of Fair Observer, a new journal covering global issues. So we are exactly in that space of trying to get a global dialogue growing from different disciplines, and from people from different disciplines in many countries. And my question to all of you, and I agree with Professor Alves, and I was talking to Clay Shirky actually last week about this, is that, and this is a question to all of you, is that at the end of the day, the state and health of the media depends on the interest and engagement of an audience. And often, paradoxically, there are in times of crisis, people are more engaged than in times of complete consumerism. You look at media in Bangladesh and Pakistan, and it is often talking about more relevant issues than in India, which is all about clicks and sensationalization. So my question to you is, how do you use the new media and other forms of media to engage the public and create meaningful media?
Yeah, Yael.
Yeah, it's on. Thank you.
I know that social media can contribute and especially be very helpful in creating virtuous cycle of information. And you have covered empty spaces and have taken, if will, the space of what was traditional media. Boris this morning assessed something very important, and he said that traditional media has somehow failed to the agenda of objective information and may be transformed into tools of factories of attack. So there's a broader tendency or maybe a threat with blogs converting into the same path of becoming these tools. And I wanted to know what's your take on if there's an adjusting, you think this is going to follow an adjusting process in which readers will be the ones that will definitely be the ones who will contribute to give the sense of credibility to the blogs, or there has to be an agency implementation that it's not a government agency but a rather supranational or private agency. And it's basically, the question is addressed as to the matter of ethics. And ethics is the basic questions for traditional media and for blogs. And I think we have a huge vacuum in the ethics field.
Ricardo.
Yes. Hello. This is a question for Graciela. I remember you have worked for Página 12, one of the most important newspapers in Argentina regarding the courageous and independence to cover news. And even Página 12 was at that time, I remember, supported by US mainstream media. And the question would be, what can alternative journalism right now learn? What lessons can Página 12 from that time teach us now?
Okay.
Okay, so we have the floor open for all of you.
Yeah, well, we can start with the engagement question. I think that's, if you know the answer to that, your project will be very successful and you're going to be a rich man. Don't forget to send a donation to the University of Texas at Austin. This is the key element, is how to engage the audience in a dialogue and in an interest that others are not doing. I mean, when you think about La Silla, Vacia, and when you think about Juanita living here, Cambridge, with some ideas in her head, and a year or a year and a half later, launching a news organization, and there was a figure in her slide that was very significant: 350,000 unique visitors. It is absolutely amazing that a modest budget-based news organization that was created there has this amount of people, and the only explanation to this is that as she showed us, it is a very engaging site that understands the interactivity of this new language that we speak in the digital world. Do you want us to keep answering all at once?
Please.
Okay. The other one about the tools, you're right. I mean, I usually say that I don't mind when people call me cyber enthusiast, but I'm not a cyber utopian. I'm not saying that this is a panacea, that this new world, it's a jungle out there. My metaphor is a jungle that has lots of snakes and bad things happening. One of the bad things that happens now is first of all the huge cacophony that everybody's talking at the same time, and then the fact that everybody can find in this universe of communication just what they want to hear. So we have been very concerned about the end of serendipity, which has been traditionally one of the things that journalism has offered, was you to be surprised by something important and relevant for your life that you would have never looked for. And we are saying, with the fragmentation of the news, etc., we are losing that. So there are some challenges that are huge, but that's why it's important to understand how profound the changes are, how different the world is, and you nailed to the solution for journalism at least is to be loyal to the 9 elements. I mean, to the elements, to the principles, and to what you pointed out, the ethics. We are becoming, as journalists, an instance of verification of what is out there. People who bash journalism and say that is the end of journalism, including someone here, I am sure that when they learn in social media something important that has happened, the first thing you do is to go to the credible, trustable, professional journalist source to see if that happened. And it's our obligation to be there and to make sure that we create business models and the narrative model that make us possible in this new world. So this is basically my answer to both.
I will just answer Ricardo's question because I don't have anything to add to what Rosental said or anything interesting to say about ethics. I'm sorry. But I mean, I have ideas, but I don't think they would add to this conversation. But I think Página 12 is a very good example to bring out now because I think Página 12, it was, I think, the last successful alternative newspaper created in Argentina. It came out in 1987. It was a really fine newspaper. I started my career there when I was 20, and I worked with them for 7 years. And Página 12 was they had. It was in a way. I mean, the idea of Página 12 was that they had a human rights agenda. It was after the military, the trials to the military junta in Argentina, and that was a big and still is a big story in Argentina. And so they had this position that. One of the, that the human rights was a main story for them, a main idea, and then they brought to Argentina the idea of watchdog journalism. It was very critical. Investigative journalism was possible in Argentina in this democratic period because of what Página 12 did, and it did a very important thing that other newspapers did in the past. La Opinión of Jacobo Timerman in the 70s, I guess Crítica in the early 19th century, and other few newspapers or magazines. This was, of course, the era of print journalism. There was no new media yet, or no internet. But what they did, and I think that still true with new media, with the new scenario, is that a good quality alternative newspaper forced mainstream media to modernize, and there were many stories that mainstream, traditional newspapers would never tell because it was against their interests. That Página 12 or other, these alternative newspapers starting telling, and they forced them by exposing them. They forced them to start investigating and to start covering stories that they would never have covered before. So I think competition is the only thing that works in Argentina. I guess in other parts of the world, of course, as well. But I think if you want good journalism, you cannot just talk about it. You have to have a good quality. You have to have a media outlet that does that, and then people recognize that right away. The other journalists, you have to influence the rest of your colleagues, of the journalists and editors, and that's going to push modernization and will improve the media ecosystem right away. And it's impossible that it doesn't happen like that. And the last example is we had actually there was another, but it was not successful. There was a small newspaper that came out a few years ago in Argentina. It was called Crítica, and the managing editor was the same guy who was the managing editor of one of the director of Página 12 when it came out. And Crítica was a disaster as a print paper. It wasn't a good newspaper at all, and and it looked old, and it was the time of internet and new media, and they came out with a very old proposition. But they had an online, they had a website, and the website became, I think they sold 20,000 papers a day, and 300,000 people read or what was in the website every day. So the actual success was the website. It was not much different from the paper, but they had blogs, and the main thing they had was that they allowed comments in every story and in the blogs, and so everybody who did not want to, it was a very active conversation in the website. It was very interesting, especially people who think, for the center left or left politically, it was the only place they had where to discuss politics and the situation, and it was a very interesting. I thought it was a very interesting thing, and instead of going, digital and closing down the paper edition, they just sank the whole thing, and they shut down. It was also the management was a disaster. But I think my answer would be that the only way to modernize and to have a good journalism is through competition.
We're going to have Marcela and then Juanita.
Hi, I just want to say that in this boom of the social medias in Mexico, that many citizens use to protect them, but we have a new phenomenon, and it's interesting because we have the blog del narco, a blog created by people who divulgate all the horror, and they post videos of killings and all the interrogation and the torture, and but many journalists look for these medias, look for the information to explain or understand what is happening, why, who is doing what, and in other way, too much of the social media information is false and creates psychosis and panic and paralyze the whole cities, and we have been many of these panic scenes in many cities. So some people are telling the governments are trying to regulate, and the Twitter, and they sent to jail to Twitters, to Twitteros for tweet some of this information. So we are in these two sides.
Juanita.
Yeah, well, sound is quite bad, so I couldn't hear well the first question. I think it was about how to have the community engaged. Well, I think that for La Silla Vacia, really understanding what Rosental says, that the new role of the audience is key, and we in La Silla Vacia, we assume that the audience is part of the newsroom, but in a sincere way, not as a way to increase traffic, but to really take them into account. So they're in the center of La Silla Vacia. They produce stories that we have an editor editing the stories of the users. Now we are also publishing the flow of the conversation of users about the topics that we are covering, and that's being reflected in the page. And each user can have their own picture, their own biography. And I think that's key to have success, is to really incorporate them as active participants in the page. Now we are going to launch a strategy to get donations from users starting next week. So I think that will be interesting to see, how far the commitment goes, because I think what we really have to start thinking is how to become sustainable even if Soros decides not to finance this kind of media anymore. So we want to try and really measure the kind of commitment that users have to La Silla Vacia, and how successful we have been in creating a real family around La Silla Vacia. So
thank you, Juanita. Well, my dear friends, we are coming to the end of this wonderful conference. We've had very, very good presentations throughout the day. We've had wonderful discussions. We've had all kinds of presentations, the provocateurs, the more moderates, all kinds, and we've had a lot of fun in the arguments that have been put on the table. I wanted to say thanks to our hosts here at the Rockefeller Center. I wanted especially to give thanks to two people without this wouldn't have been really possible. And one is, of course, Stephanie. I mean, she's been the driving force behind this event. And the other, one is Jit Namens, about whom everyone asked me if she is it a she or a he. So Jit is a beautiful she, and she's been wonderful in making this happen. I wanted also to give thanks to our sponsors, to Yael and her husband, who have been kind enough to make this happen, and the Car Center for the idea, and of course shared with Pablo. Thank you very much again, and we hope we can make this a permanent project.
And thank you. You are great. Thank you.